Welcome to the background video for SOL 8.16.
Teachers are encouraged to review the strand introduction for the big picture of the standards. This is the introduction for the strand in which 8.16 falls. In the 8th grade curriculum framework, this can be found on page 23.
While all of the mathematical process goals for students apply to this standard, connections and representations are highlighted in this video.
SOL 8.16a and the essential knowledge and skills direct students to recognize and describe graphs of lines with positive, negative, and zero slopes.
SOL 8.16 Bullet B and the corresponding essential knowledge and skills introduce the equation y equals mx plus b and ask students to find slope and a y-intercept given a table, given an equation, and given a graph. In 8th grade, coordinates will be limited to integers.
8.16c and the essential knowledge and skills require that students determine the independent and dependent variables.
Graphing a line given the equation in the form y equals mx plus b is covered in SOL 8.16d. In 8th grade, y-intercepts will be integers.
Finally, in 8.16e and the corresponding essential knowledge and skills, students will write an equation of a line given slope and y-intercepts, or a practical situation where slope and y-intercept are verbally described. While the second bullet in the essential knowledge and skills is shown as an individual essential knowledge and skill, making connections between verbal descriptions, tables, equations, and graphs regardless of the relationship, be it additive or multiplicative, should be taught within 8.16a, 8.16b, 8.16c, and 8.16d.
Students will begin their discussion of slope in 8th grade with the definition of linear function, a situation with a constant rate and a type of continuous function. Teachers help students make the connection with prior knowledge of slope as a vertical change over the horizontal change, or the rate of change.
Students must know that the value of the slope represents the steepness and direction of the line. 8th grade is the first time students experience negative and zero slopes. While undefined slope usually accompanies this learning, students in 8th grade only discuss this in comparison to lines with a defined slope.
In 7th grade, students learn the multiplicative relationship modeled by the equation y equals mx, and the additive relationship modeled by the equation y equals x plus b. Now in 8th grade, students combine the two to be represented by the equation y equals mx plus b.
Students will be required to determine the slope and y-intercept from the equation in y equals mx plus b form. Students can then create a table of values using slope triangles, which was introduced in 7th grade.
Students will also be given the graph of a linear function and asked to determine the slope and the y-intercept. Students identify the y-intercept from the graph and then create slope triangles to find the change in y and the change in x, or the vertical change and the horizontal change, which will determine the slope.
7th grade students graphed equations from the form y equals mx and y equals x plus b by selecting values for x, substituting them in the equation, and solving for y. Teachers should help students see the connection between their prior knowledge and the equation now being in the form y equals mx plus b. Here we added a table and graph to represent the equation in the curriculum framework and the method of substituting values to graph a linear function.
In 7th grade, students used slope triangles to create tables of ordered pairs from equations y equals x plus b, beginning with the y-intercept and using the slope of 1. And with the equation y equals mx, beginning with a y-intercept of 0 and a given slope. 8th grade teachers should help students make the connection to this, pointing out that the equation changed by including both slope and y-intercept.
Another example of using slope triangles to create a graph and a table is given in the curriculum framework.
Throughout grades 6 and 7, students have been exposed to real-life examples of linear functions. They may or may not have learned that different representations are acceptable for labeling the axes of a coordinate plane, and that for the sake of effective communication, often mathematicians just use x and y.
During upper elementary school, students learned about input-output tables, and 6th and 7th grade teachers built on this prior knowledge. 7th grade standard 7.10 suggested that an informal discussion of independent and dependent variables occur. 8th grade teachers are responsible for helping students connect all this information and completely understand that the independent variable is the input and the dependent variable is the output.
When discussing proportional relationships in context, it's important to note when the ordered pairs can be connected and when not. In the speed of the sloth example, time is continuous, so it's possible to consider how far the sloth moved in 2 1/2 minutes or 3 minutes 15 seconds, so students are allowed to connect the points into a line. Whereas in the candy apple example, a person cannot purchase 2 1/2 candy apples or 3 1/4 candy apples. Therefore, students cannot connect the points in this graph. In SOL 8.15, students have learned about domain and range in a function and should connect that knowledge with continuous linear functions.
The curriculum framework gives 2 more real-world examples of linear functions that should be connected in a line or are continuous, and should not be connected into a line or are discrete functions.
We have added this graphic organizer to help you see the multiple representations of function that students should encounter.
Students must learn to write an equation of the line in the form y equals mx plus b when given slope and y-intercept. Students will also be presented with verbal descriptions of practical situations from which they will determine the slope and y-intercept and write the equation in the form y equals mx plus b. In 7th grade, students have written equations in the form y equals mx and y equals x plus b, so teachers can help students make connections with these forms in writing the equation y equals mx plus b.
The final information in the Understanding the Standard portion of the curriculum framework for SOL 8.16 just reminds the 8th grade teacher that in 6th grade, students work strictly with multiplicative relationships or proportional relationships, and that in 7th grade, students graphed those multiplicative relationships and explored additive relationships as well. Please be sure to watch the SOL 8.16 instructional and assessment videos to complement your learning. The videos 6.12, 7.10, 8.16 Linear Graphing Overview provides a connection for teachers to see the entire sequence in middle school.